into that process. So specifically HR, I couldn't say, but there would be lots of talent as part of that committee process of rewriting the party's constitution and rules. And to this day, they are, I would say, are fairly robust and stand the test of time.
Okay, and without going into too much to any detail about specific communications, were there any responses to the First Minister's email concerning this?
Yes, there were. And I think those are a matter of public record, I think, that we had complaints at that time about a parliamentarian and another individual.
And do you think that the action that was taken was satisfactory to those who had raised complaints or raised issues as a result of that email?
I would very much hope so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on now, please, to Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Mr. Murrell. Happy birthday. I guess. Thank you.
It's a good way to spend your birthday.
Yes, I'm sure you've been looking forward to it.
Can't wait for the cake later.
Thank you. I want to ask you about two specific items that you cover in your written evidence to the committee. And the first of that is in relation to the meetings that the First Minister held with Mr. Salmon, which were on the 2nd of April, the 7th of June and the 14th of July 2018. And the meetings on the 2nd of April and the 14th of July were held in your home. Now, what was your understanding of the capacity in which the First Minister held those meetings with Mr. Salmon?
Well, I wasn't at home, I wasn't aware of the capacity in which she was having the meetings.
So you weren't in the House at the time?
I wasn't at home at either meeting.
Right, okay, thank you.
And I think the third meeting took place at SNP conference on the eve of an SNP conference, and I suspect I was busy elsewhere.
Okay.
But I wasn't at home on the two occasions where the meeting took place.
Okay, because one of the things we're trying to understand is what was the nature of these meetings? We heard evidence last week from John Summers, who's the First Minister's Principal Private Secretary, that if these had been government meetings, they would have been in the ministerial diary and notes would have been kept, and that wasn't the case. So I think a reasonable assumption would be that these were meetings held in the First Minister's capacity as leader of the SNP. And if we read the First Minister's submission, she makes reference to the meeting, first of all, the meeting on the 2nd of April, how as party leader she considered it important to find out whether Mr. Salmon might be about to resign from the SNP. And then in relation to the meeting on the 14th of July, she says again she was anxious as party leader to understand whether his handling of this matter was likely to become public in the near future. So would it be reasonable to assume, therefore, that these were meetings held in her position as leader of the SNP?
Well, I think her position that she sets out is reasonable. I think the nature of the meeting, is really for her to say, but, it seems to make sense in what I've read of her submission that her impression of what the meeting was about, altered when the discussion happened. So, that seems a reasonable version of events that she sets out in her own written submission.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Because you say in your submission that you didn't discuss these meetings with Nicola, and yet you're the chief executive of the SNP. Surely if this was a SNP matter that was being discussed, would that not have been brought to your attention?
Well, Nicola meeting with Alec wasn't a big, it was not an uncommon event, shall we say. I mean, it wasn't anything unusual. It could have been about any matter as far as, I wasn't really aware that he was coming to the House on the first occasion. And it doesn't strike me as anything unusual. It was, they met, they spoke on the phone. I mean, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary.
So when were you first told about the nature of these meetings?
Well, at the time it became public knowledge. I mean, that's, you know, and that's the, you know, whatever it is, the 25th of August or thereabouts, the following year.
So the leader of the SNP didn't at any point think to tell the chief executive of the SNP that there was a looming problem with the former leader of the SNP and the former First Minister of Scotland that might end up in the public domain.
But I think that the issue is that the issue that was raised with Nicola at the time was a Scottish Government matter. And, you know, that's, you know, Scottish Government business is not for me. I mean, it's, you know, you know, it's every single day Scottish Government business is not really to be on a daily basis. You know, Nicola, it's a very confidential process. She's been a minister for a very long time, and we just don't talk about government business.
Yes, but you say it's government business, but you know, I think one thing we are now clear about was that these meetings were not conducted on government business. You know, they were not in the ministerial diary. There were no notes taken. In her own submission, Nicola Sturgeon suggests that these were party matters that were being discussed. You know, these were either government meetings or they were party meetings.
Well, I think, to be fair, what she sets out in the evidence is the case of prior to the meeting she thought it was about a party matter, and once Alec told her what the meeting was about, then it became something else.
Well, that might have been the case for the first meeting, but surely the subsequent meetings it would have been obvious what the matter being discussed was.
The Scottish Government matter.
Well, I think you know, there's a degree of confusion here about whether these were government business meetings or whether these were party business meetings, and I don't think you're helping us to clear that up.
Well, but I mean, Nicola sets it out in her own written submission, and she will be in this chair very shortly, so you can ask her directly.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you about something else? Because you make reference again in your, I think your second written submission to the text messages you sent on the 25th of January 2019. Now, this was the date of the first appearance of Mr. Salmon in court in relation to the criminal charges against him. And the first text message said this: totally agree folk should be asking the police questions. Report now with Procurator Fiscal on charges, which leaves police twiddling their thumbs. So good time to be pressurising them. Would be good to know Met looking at events in London. And the second text message, which was shortly afterwards, said, TBH, to be honest, the more fronts he is having to firefight on, the better for all complainers, so CPS action would be a good thing. Can I start by asking you, what were the events in London that you were referring to?
I mean, I think it, you know, there was, by that stage, there was, you know, obviously charges had been, it's the day after the charge, Alec had been in court. So by that stage, there was awareness of concerns and complaints from different, you know, parts of the SNP. So some were from Westminster, some, you know, here in Scotland. So, I mean, there was some understanding of there being different judicial jurisdictions in play in terms of complaints or concerns being raised.
Right. So you were aware of pending complaints against Mr. Salmon from people in London?
Well, I think it, you know, you know, no matter who has raised concerns within the SNP, I mean, you know, I don't have their permission to talk about their situation, but, you know, I think you can take from the text exchange that there was some awareness that CPS action was possible or pending.
Yeah. These complaints clearly have not made it to a charges being laid, but you were aware there was something going on in the background, presumably.
Not specifics, but I mean,
there was chatter. Specific issues had been raised with you. A specific complaint had been made.
No, nothing specific. I mean, just the fact that some matters were not for Police Scotland or for the Crown Office.
Okay. You use the term in your first text message, that it would be a good time to be pressurising the police. I mean, you're the chief executive of Scotland's largest political party. It's not just Scotland's largest political party, it's the third largest political party in the United Kingdom in terms of the presence in the House of Commons. Is the party in government in Scotland, the First Minister of Scotland, the leader of your party, and indeed, you know, your spouse, and Police Scotland are ultimately answerable to the First Minister of Scotland. Can you see why that term causes concern?
I can see that the language that I used was open to misinterpretation. It wasn't about pressurising the police. It was about there was a great deal upset that day. I mean, the previous day, I'd been working for ALEC for 30 years at that point, and I think we were all shocked by the scale of the charges that were being brought against him. And so there was a great deal of upset the previous day. I know myself, I didn't really sleep that night, came into the office, and everyone was, you can just imagine everyone was quite gutted. Reflecting on these messages now, they seem quite out of character. So to me, it suggests just how upset I was at the time. But it wasn't about how the messages were interpreted. It was, the context was that some people that had raised concerns had questions that, obviously my upset is nothing to comparison to theirs, but they were seeking answers to things that only the police or the Crown Office could answer. So it was really, a more appropriate text message back at that point would have been to say, they should seek answers from the police or whatever. But that wasn't the language I used, and that's why I've said that I regret using that, because it just doesn't, that's not the right word to use in that context.
Okay. Do you know if there was any action taken in response to that pressure that you're referring to?
There was no pressure. It was complainers seeking answers to questions that they had. That's the context of that morning.
You see, the reason I'm asking these questions is, and why this ties into the remit of the committee, is that we're looking at a complaints process set up by the Scottish Government, which failed. And it failed women who'd made complaints because they've never had a resolution to this. And it failed and ended up costing the taxpayer over £1 million in legal costs because it was deemed to be illegal, and Mr. Salmon won his judicial review. And there are people close to Mr. Salmon, and you'll be aware of this, who believe there was a conspiracy against it. And they would point to these text messages and other evidence that's been presented as part of that. They would look at the fact, for example, that this policy applying retrospectively to former ministers was adopted despite advice to the Scottish Government not to apply it. They would refer to the fact that the policy was signed off by the First Minister. They would refer to the fact that we now know the complainers were reluctant to go to the police initially, and it was Leslie Evans, the Permanent Secretary, who involved the police in the first instance. They refer to the text message from Leslie Evans at the point where Mr. Salmon won his judicial review, saying that the battle was lost, but the war would be won. They would refer to the Scottish Government's lack of cooperation with this inquiry, and they would refer to the First Minister's lapses of memory about her first meeting in relation to Mr. Salmon. And they would add into that your text message. I mean, can you understand why there are people who think this was all about trying to get Mr. Salmon?
But the SNP's processes didn't. The procedure is exactly as it was and has been for 16 years. I mean, it's not, bar the SNP adding in an independent route for someone to raise a concern and take it to the National Secretary. Our processes haven't changed. I can only comment for the SNP. Our procedure is exactly as it was.
You said a moment ago you were very close to Mr. Salmon. You worked in his constituency office.